All right, thank you very much.
Bisa, Pak.
Continue, Pak Ronan.
Perfect. Perfect. You're aware of the topic that I'm going to present about, how to write a good academic paper. I'm just going to start off with a brief introduction of myself. I know Professor Jaka Triyana introduced me, but I hope I hope to indulge you once again, just a brief overview of my background, because I think it's important for a topic such as this that you understand where I'm coming from. There's no one correct way of writing an academic paper. It depends on your disciplinary background, the topic you are addressing, the journals you are targeting. So I just wanted to identify the scholarly and academic background that I come from, my particular research interests, and to give you some tips from my perspective concerning how to write a good academic paper for publication in an international peer-reviewed journal or a similar outlet. So I'll give a brief overview of my own research and publications before moving into how to target international journals or outlets. This is a really important, crucial first step in the preparation of your academic paper, to begin with the end in mind. Where do you ultimately want your paper to be published? Because by identifying the correct journal, that will help you in preparing the manuscript appropriately. And that brings us to the next topic that I'll address: preparing the paper, preparing what's called known as the manuscript as part of the paper submission process. Some tips in terms of writing style, in terms of structuring of the academic paper will be addressed. And then we'll have some remarks concerning the post-submission process, how to go about addressing that and ensuring that once the paper is published, it is shared with as wide an audience as possible, because
Ronan, you have a mute audio. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There we go. There we go. Sorry about that. So the ultimate goal is not just to write a good academic paper, but to ensure that your ideas, the ideas within your academic paper, are shared as broadly as possible with interested readers. So this might take the form of adapting your paper in the form of a blog, sharing your paper via social media channels, via websites such as ResearchGate, Social Science Research Network, etc. And we'll go through some of the different options for sharing your academic paper once it is out in the world. Okay. Okay, so my own background, where I'm coming from. I am essentially a socio-legal scholar, so I have been involved in legal work, but viewed through a social science lens. This reflects my background in the disciplines of sociology, politics, and law. So I've been combining these disciplines within the research that I've undertaken. The particular research interests I have center around disaster law, disaster governance, public policy for emergency management. Hence my presence at Gadjah University several times, looking at the Mount Merapi context and dealing with issues relating to urban resilience as well. You'll see some of the academic journals that I've published in. I'm sharing these not to trumpet myself, but so that you can understand where I'm coming from, the kinds of journals that I publish in, and then you can contextualize the tips that I provide to you. So I've published in a range of journals relating to disaster management, relating to humanitarian law, within the fields of human rights as well. Okay. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the crucial first step in preparing a good academic paper for publication is to get a sense of the journal or publisher where you would like to submit the paper itself. The first tip I would like to provide is to really consider an open access journal. There are a number of reasons for this. I was going to ask this as an open question within the webinar, but I think because there's so many people on the webinar, I might just go ahead and answer it. But you might, why do you think we should consider an open access journal for our publications? So you'll be aware that an open access journal is a journal that doesn't require a subscription to access the papers contained within the journal. By publishing in an open access journal, you are ensuring that the paper that you spend so much time and effort writing, that it is available to as many people, as many readers as possible, free of charge. You're removing barriers to access knowledge, essentially. So I very much encourage you to try to select an open access journal. You'll see in the top left-hand corner an icon, open access journal. So where you see this icon on a journal homepage, you can be assured that the paper that you publish in that journal will be open access, available to all for free of charge. The flip side, the consequence often of publishing an open access journal is that there might be what's known as article processing charges. Obviously, as students, including myself as an academic, I don't want to pay article processing charges, but I want to publish in an open access journal. So be aware of article processing charges. Maybe avoid journals that charge you for publishing. That's an important consideration. And then a further tip that I would have in selecting your journal or publisher is to consider the aims, what's known as the aims and scope of the journal. This is often on the homepage of the journal. If you go to the journal's webpage, you can find the About section or the aims and scope, where you will find a detailed account of the objectives of the kinds of articles that the journal publishes. So very important step is to really find a journal that it aligns with the topic of your academic paper. Another tip when selecting a journal is to be aware of the quality of the journal. Not all journals are of equal quality, to be frank. Some key questions to consider: is the journal peer-reviewed? Most of you will be aware of what peer-reviewed means. So this means that once you submit a paper, the editors of the journal will share it with other academics, other researchers involved in this, other researchers involved in the in this field, who are able to critically analyze the paper that has been submitted. So is the journal peer-reviewed? That's an important consideration. Is everybody able to see the wording? I hope it's not too small on the screen for you.
Yeah, we can see it, Pak Ronan.
That's great. That's great. I realize maybe that the wording is a little small. So very important to consider, is the journal peer reviewed? And that you can find out this information very clearly from the journal's webpage. Another quality criterion, what is the journal's impact factor? This might be less important for law-related journals, but for wider social sciences, in particular for the natural sciences, the journal's impact factor is important. The impact factor measures the citation rate, the typical citation rate of articles published in that journal. So on average, how many times is a paper that's published in that journal cited? This provides an indication of impact, generates the impact factor for the journal. So in summary, when selecting a journal publisher, consider open access, avoid any charges when submitting. Make sure your paper, and this is probably most important, the most important piece of advice in relation to this, make sure your paper aligns with the aims and scopes of that particular journal. So if you're working on international law questions relating to health law, for example, you will want to target a journal focusing on international law, or a journal focusing on medical or health law. And you'll also want to know that the journal is a quality one, and indicators of quality include that it's peer reviewed and that it has a high impact factor. So that's the first step, selecting the journal publisher. I'd like to move on to the next step. The next step, preparing the manuscript. So you've selected the journal. Now you need to prepare the manuscript or prepare the paper. Manuscript is the term that's usually described, or the term that's usually used by journals for the papers that they receive. So when preparing the manuscript, have a look at other papers that have been published by the journal. Get a sense of the style with which other papers have been written. Not necessarily the content of those papers, but how are those papers structured? What kind of tone is used when writing those particular papers? As you prepare the manuscript, ensure that all along, as the process proceeds, that the paper that is being prepared continues to fall within the scope of the journal. If at some stage during the preparation of the manuscript, you might need to stop and reassess, okay, is there another journal that might be more suited to this paper as it is being prepared? So ensure you're within the scope of the journal that you're targeting as you go along. A very practical tip, and the reason why it's so important to select a journal in advance is that journals often have very strict paper length requirements. So once you select the journal, you will be able to easily keep within the paper length advised by the journal. It's very difficult, for example, and it's happened to me several times. I write a paper, maybe it's 10,000 words, and then I find an ideal journal with which to publish the paper, but the journal requires papers or has a maximum word limit of 6,000 words. And that's a very difficult process to edit your work from 10,000 words to 6,000. Referencing as well, each journal has a different referencing approach to referencing, different referencing format. So by knowing the journal that you are publishing in advance, you can adapt your paper to the referencing or the citation style that the journal requires. Another thing is, before submitting, it's helpful to ensure that your manuscript is accurate and readable. The paper that you submit in the first instance to a journal, it will never be perfect, but it is always helpful. And these are a couple of tips that I have, is if it's possible to share your paper with a colleague, with a student colleague or with a professor at your university, and ask for some feedback. This is a very normal process within the approach to publication. Share with a colleague who will be able to provide some helpful, constructive feedback on the paper. I think that's very, very, very important. And if you have the opportunity, you're at the beginning of your academic careers, or you're thinking about publishing, don't be hesitant to submit your paper as an abstract to a conference. Today, I'm speaking to you from Ireland. It's possible to attend conferences across the world, and together maybe with your supervisor, you might like to present your paper initially to get some helpful feedback before you ultimately submit to a journal. I think that those tips are important in preparing a manuscript. Okay, the screen's a bit slow. So just to break this down a little further, and to look at the structure of a good academic paper, the first point to make is to plan out the paper in advance. With publishing, like with everything else, you will save a lot of time, a lot of agony, a lot of stress by planning in advance. Believe me, I know from my own experience with this. So just maybe just like you might structure an essay as part of your program, think out the structure of your paper. And the structure of a paper for publication in a journal can slightly differ to the paper that you might write as part of your program. So you will have noticed, you've all read journal articles that academic papers usually begin with an abstract. And intuitively, you might think, I know how to write an abstract, but there are a number of conventions that you should adhere to when writing an abstract. Basically, the purpose of an abstract is to ensure that the overall meaning, the overall thrust of the paper is intelligible within 200, 300 words. The journal will provide a word limit for the abstract usually. So the abstract should provide, the background to the topic, the research question or the objectives, the findings, and then the conclusions, all summarized within the word limit for the abstract. Another point, the title of the paper, it's not included in the slides, but the title of the paper is really crucial. The title should reflect the content of the paper, but sometimes, if you're reading in English, if you're reading academic journals in English, you often see titles that are very catchy, that play on words, that draw on maybe idioms, or and sometimes they can be quite witty and really draw the reader in. Sometimes posing short questions, like the latest paper I have is, does tenure security reduce disaster risk? Evidence from. So these kind of tricks help to market, in a sense, your academic paper. And that's important, because you want your paper to be read by a wide readership. So if it's catchy, it's attractive, it encourages readers to really engage with the paper, and eventually perhaps cite it and ensure that the paper is well taken up within scholarship. So you've got your heading, your title, your abstract. Structure of the paper, the first section is usually an introduction. You need to provide a background to the topic. Think of a generally well-educated reader. With the introduction, you don't want to go straight into the complexity of the topic. You want to draw your reader in, introduce the general background to the topic, why you are writing about the topic, the rationale for this particular topic, the problem within health law in Indonesia, for example, or international law relating to public health emergencies. Identify the problem that your paper addresses, the general objectives of the paper, a research question if you have one, and also lay out the structure of the paper. So you're going to say, maybe firstly, I will outline the current legal regulations relating to a particular topic, then I will criticize it from a certain perspective in a second section. In the third section, I will do this. So with the introduction, say what you are going to say. Introduce the topic to the general reader, provide the structure, and in the main body, it's in the main body that you go into the detail of your argument within the paper. Typically, 3 to 4 sections. You've all read journal articles. You'll understand, the appropriate number of sections, but also the appropriate headings. So having good headings for each of the sections in the paper are important to help the reader to navigate through your paper. Academic papers can be quite complex, so it's important to really make it easy for the reader. An academic paper is not meant to confuse, it's meant to educate. I think that's a very important point. So appropriate headings. If you have 3 or 4 sections, ensure that there's a logical flow between the sections. So the first section leads on to the second section, leads on to the third section. And maybe at the end of the first section, you might conclude with a couple of sentences that allow you to move effortlessly into the second section. Okay, and then the conclusion. I often read academic papers, and they're introducing new ideas in the conclusion, new findings, new arguments that haven't appeared in the main body. Really, the conclusion is meant to summarize the main findings or the main conclusions from the paper as a whole. You might like to provide recommendations for relevant stakeholders, and this is really important aspect of academic papers as well. We don't want to just identify the problems within medical law or health law, but we also want to identify potential solutions as well. So integrating recommendations for relevant stakeholders, whether it's legislators, whether it's policy advisors, recommendations for patients, for other stakeholders. Give due consideration to recommendations. Some papers aren't so policy orientated that they allow for the inclusion of recommendations, but where it's possible, please do consider it. So with the introduction, you say what you're going to say. In the main body, you get into the detail. So you say, you make your arguments, and then the conclusion, you reiterate what you have said. So the reader is very much led through the process, so that the reader understands what you're going to say in the introduction. They hear what you're saying in the main body, and then they understand precisely what you are arguing within the conclusion of the paper. We'll go into some more detail about academic writing shortly, but in terms of the structure, these are the key issues. And then referencing. the referencing usually has to be undertaken in line with the requirements of the journal. So do have a look at the journal's requirements on referencing as you are preparing your manuscript. Okay. Structure of a paper. I've also subtitled this slide, Tell a Good Story. This is similar to the argument I made about the title. The title of the paper should be inviting. It should accurately reflect the paper. But with the paper as well, you want to ensure that you're telling a good story, that it's compelling, that you're not confusing the reader, but educating the reader. Everyone here is very smart. The readers are smart. You don't have to convince anyone that you're smart by using very complex language, whether in Bahasa or in English. The purpose is really to really convince. And as lawyers, I think we're quite good at making these arguments. So treat an academic paper in that way, in that you are trying to convince or educate your reader rather than to confuse or obfuscate. That's something I think I'm still I'm still learning, but that would be a tip I would have. So tell a good story, introduce it, say what your argument is, and then conclude. Okay. So kill your darlings. This is an idiom in English. It basically means when you're writing, don't be hesitant to remove words, phrases, sentences, or sections of your paper that are not relevant to your overall objectives of the paper as laid out in the introduction. A paper has to be, very efficient. Usually you're limited in terms of the number of words, whether it's 8,000 words, 10,000 words, 12,000 words. So each word, each phrase, each sentence, each section of your paper has to serve a function within the broader paper. So this quote from Josh Ritter is very helpful. Doing good work and having creative thoughts means very little unless you're able to express that work and those thoughts to others in as straightforward a way as possible. To edit yourself isn't an admission of lack of talent. It's sticking up for that talent by taking the time to make sure that everyone can understand what you're trying to say. Editing is getting it right, nothing else. So I completely understand. As a native English speaker, I find it challenging to edit myself. As a non-native speaker, I can understand that there is a considerable added challenge in terms of editing. It is very much worth the time and editing your work, making sure it's correct. As I mentioned before, share your paper before you submit to a journal with a colleague, with your supervisor, for feedback in terms of the language accuracy, the flow of the paper, etc. So, what else do we need to do? What do we mean by editing? Edit for accuracy. Is everything you're saying correct? Is it referenced properly? Is the referencing correct? Double checking that before you submit, that's important, because it will increase, obviously, your chances that the paper will be considered for publication. The content, is there consistent flow? So is the style consistent from the introduction through to the conclusion? is the referencing consistent? Is the use of terms consistent? Paying attention to consistency is important. Flow, I mentioned this before in terms of the flow between sections. Are you finishing one section in your main body by ensuring that there's a logical, that the logical next step is the next section. So ensuring that at the end of one section, you are preparing the reader to move into the next section. Flow. Another editing tip, spelling, punctuation. Obviously with Microsoft Word, that's something that can help. But, making sure that's correct. It's an obvious point to make, but something that is essential when preparing a good academic paper. Grammar, again, something that maybe if you want to share with colleagues, but don't be, spelling, punctuation, grammar, very important, editing, very important, but don't let, don't strive for perfection with your paper. Don't let these tips intimidate you or make you feel that you do not have the capacity because of language issues. The academic journals, law journals, international law journals take into account that authors may not use English as a native language. So they can address these issues at a later stage in the process. But when you're first submitting the paper, in order for the editors of the journal, in order for the reviewers of the journal paper, in order for them to understand your argument, having the grammar and these other issues addressed is important to the extent possible. Format, presentation, is it in line with the requirements of the journal in terms of referencing, also in terms of heading styles, numbering of sections? Some journals require you to number the sections within your academic paper. And this is an important one. It's important for me as a native speaker as much for non-native speakers, that we should use plain English and not to complicate the English or the language that we are using. Often when we're dealing with complex topics, and we're all dealing with complex topics at postgraduate level, but we need to convey those topics in as simple and as straightforward a way as possible. Just looking at time, yeah, just so that's what you want to edit for. What do you want to eliminate? Okay, typos. They'll come up on your word processor. Gobbledygook. I'm not sure if you know this term. Gobbledygook means kind of nonsense or words that are or sentences that are overly complex. Basically, overly complex sentences. Sometimes when I'm editing myself, I see a sentence that is 4 or 5 lines long, and I say to myself, Ronan, stop. Let's break this sentence down into something more simpler so that the reader can really understand the point that you're making. Very important to address overly complex sentences, to break it down into plain English. Overused words, yes. So you don't want to use the same word in each sentence, because that can kind of jar for the reader. Sometimes it might be helpful to vary the words that you're using in that respect. Eliminate also words or terms you don't understand, and this applies for everyone preparing an academic paper. Every concept has been rigorously interrogated by scholarship. Essentially, every existing concept has been rigorously interrogated by scholarship. So if you don't fully understand the words or terms that you're using, it's important to refer to existing scholarship to really make sure that you fully understand those particular concepts or words or terms. And maybe it's an opportunity for you, after doing that research into a concept, it's important to sorry, there seems to be some sound coming up. It's important to define how you are using certain words or terms. And this is, as lawyers, this is something that comes naturally, to make sure we define our key terms. Often that might be something that might be something that you might like to address in your introduction or in the main body of your journal, defining the key terms. For example, with the international health regulations for the World Health Organization, how is a public health emergency defined within the regulations? Making sure that each term that you use is defined very clearly and referenced clearly. Okay, post-submission. So you've prepared your journal paper, you've submitted it to the journal. What happens next? Well, you'll get a response from the journal. Sometimes, and it happens to senior professors, it happens to all academics at some stage during their career. Sometimes there's a straight out rejection of the paper. And sometimes in that case, you might like to revise it, you might like to get further feedback, you might like to consider, okay, maybe there's a better, more suitable journal for this paper. Another potential response from the journal, they might request major revisions. So the journal received your paper, they sent it to reviewers, and usually there are 2 or 3 reviewers of an academic journal, and the reviewers might recommend to the editors that the paper is to be published subject to major revisions. And often this takes a good deal of work to address, but having a major revision response isn't bad. It gives you an opportunity to improve your paper and to receive the feedback from peer reviewers who understand the field well. Often, or sometimes you'll receive the response of a minor revision, so you might have to change certain sections, you might have to define a term, or the minor revisions are precisely that, don't require a huge amount of time or expertise to address. And then another option, response option from the journal is that the journal immediately accepts the paper. It does happen. I've heard it has happened. It has never happened to me, but it's very rare that you prepare a paper, submit it to a journal, and then a few weeks or a month later, they come back and say, "We love it. We don't want you to change anything." That's very rare, and this is the academic process. This is why we engage in seminars and discussions. No one has a monopoly on the truth. We are constantly engaging with each other, learning from each other, and that never stops. Even after you become a student, if you become an academic, if you become a practitioner, we are constantly learning, and I think that's a universal. When revising your paper, you get feedback from reviewers that's a major revision or minor revision. carefully consider the reviewer's comments. There might be a temptation to disagree with the reviewer, and that's fine. Where you disagree, explain politely why you disagree with certain comments in your response to the journal. But usually you should carefully consider the comments and make the changes that are recommended, unless you really disagree. A good tip when resubmitting your paper is to create a table. So in the first column, you have the list of comments from your reviewers in relation to each of the sections, whether it's introduction, section 1, section 2, section 3, conclusion. And then in the second column, you have the responses as to how you revised your paper. So you can submit that table, and you can submit also the revised manuscript. And usually the revised manuscript is resubmitted using tracked changes in Microsoft Word or something similar. So then hopefully you have published an academic paper, and that's an enormous achievement. The first time especially is a very proud moment when you publish an academic paper. It's a proud moment for you, for your teachers as well. Congratulations if you managed to do that. But I have a bullet point here. Publishing alone is not sufficient. Increasingly, academia is looking towards impact. So what is the impact of the research that we undertake on society, on the legal system, on patient rights, on rights of citizens? So how do we ensure that the academic paper that we ultimately write and that we ultimately publish leads to wider change? Think of other means of dissemination. You might like to share it via social media, via blogs, via personal website. You might like to share the findings of your paper with relevant governmental bodies or professional associations, medical doctors associations, for example, if you're writing in relation to a particular topic that affects the medical profession. So consider ways of reaching out to the stakeholders for your academic paper, so that it doesn't just stay on a shelf, a figurative shelf, but really makes a real world impact, because ultimately that's what we're all here to do. So I think that's it from me in terms of the presentation, but I see a number of questions coming in on the chat, and hopefully we can address those questions and maybe some other questions in plenary. You have the presentation slides in Zoom, so you might like to check those out. I should have included my email on the slides, but so maybe I can share that in the chat shortly. So thank you very much for engaging. So it's wonderful to see so many of you on the line. And I look forward to the next section, maybe a discussion.
Right. Right. Thank you very much, Pak Ronan. It's really, really interesting and very meaningful insights for your presentation. Once again, Bapak Ibu, saudara-saudara sekalian, there are several hints that I want to underline. First, academic paper aim is to educate people. So it needs a long process. It is very common. Second, please do not hesitate for you to present into a seminar for having a very good feedback from other participants, academia, and also from those who are working in the field. Third, this is the most important thing, is that please try to know about the specific targeted journals designed for your article. That is where you have the background information from the journal, and you may prepare yourself. And I think it is the most crucial thing delivered by Pak Ronan. So I will invite and have a question and answer, Pak Ronan. First, it comes from my students. How to design a good abstract, Pak Ronan. First question. How to make a very good abstract? It is from Din Yendri. She is a medical doctor. First question, could you please respond? And the second one is that how we know about tips and tricks on finding the right logical construct to be used in the academic paper itself. Because it's so many methods that can be used. The question from Pak Albert is how to select the relevant logical construct. This is the second question. And then it is a very common question on how to, aware of the plagiarism, the issue of plagiarism in academic journals. It comes from, my students in Magister of Notary. From Pak Dimas, Pak Adrianto Winugroho, he asked how would be our reaction if our submission is rejected without any feedback. So this is the third question. May you give a response, and then I will continue for the next question and answer. Please, Pak Ronan.
Thank you, Jaka. Yeah, so thank you so much for all the engagement on this. So I might just address each of the questions in order. So how to write a good abstract. Yeah, it's crucial because you know yourself when you are searching the literature, you find it the title of a journal, and the next thing you read is the abstract. So the abstract has to adequately reflect the contents of the academic paper, of the wider paper, and it's a crucial in ensuring that your work is found by the readers that need to see it. So an abstract essentially, so you have the paper, and then the abstract kind of distills or summarizes essentially the entire paper. So you might have a background to the topic, why the topic is important, the objectives of the paper, the findings of the paper or your argument, and then a conclusion, all contained within the 200 or 300 words. What is helpful is maybe as you are continuing your reading, have a look at more closely at the abstracts that you find in academic papers. See how they are constructed. Identify how they summarize the paper along those headings: background and rationale, objectives, findings and argument, and then conclusion. And then over time, you will internalize what it means to write an abstract for your own paper. So that'd be my advice. The relevant logical construct, I hope I'm interpreting this question correctly. So just how to structure the paper correctly and in a logical way. And this is really critical as well, really important. There are a number of ways. Maybe it might be helpful in the introduction to lay out a number of objectives within the paper. And then for each section of your paper can correspond to one of those objectives. That's one way of doing it. And that really shows the reader. The reader will be able to follow the paper very clearly if he or she knows in the introduction that the first objective is this, the second objective is this, and the third objective is this. They will be awaiting different sections relating to each of these objectives. Again, another piece of advice, as you're reading academic papers in your area, in your field, have a look at how they're constructed and why the author or authors might have constructed the paper in that way. You will notice, in the main body that there are several sections that's broken up very clearly. Have a look at why they might have done that, and then consider with your own paper how you go about doing that as well. That would be some comments on that. Plagiarism. Yeah, but very important topic again, something that has to be avoided in all academic writing, particularly when you're submitting to an academic journal, very much to avoid. Yeah, plagiarism, you know, there are tools to check your own material for plagiarism. Essentially, if you adhere to proper referencing, if you put in quotation marks, the references from other papers, then you can easily avoid plagiarism. But what I would encourage you to do is not to have, within a paper, not to have a series of quotations, one after the other. Rather, try to understand the points that are being made by other authors and present them in your own words, but always reference appropriately, that while you're presenting these ideas in your own words and you're integrating these ideas into your own argument, you acknowledge at the same time through referencing, through footnotes or through brackets, the author and year in brackets, referenced the inspiration for those ideas. Very important. And maybe here, you know, the online checker might be helpful, but also if you're sharing it with colleagues, they might be able to point out instances of plagiarism. But certainly, plagiarism has no place in academia. You have to very much avoid it where you can. If you don't understand what plagiarism is, ask your colleagues, ask your supervisor. It's very important to avoid that. And what's the rationale? The rationale is that it's an ethical obligation. We want to acknowledge the people whose ideas we are using. And that's very important. It's also very important for the reader then, okay, to be able to say, if I want to find out more about this idea that you are referencing in your paper, you can go to another paper to find out more. So it allows academic scholarship to advance. We can move from paper to paper as required. Okay, the fourth question. Sometimes you might receive a response from a journal after submitting a paper. Rejection. Usually the editors will provide a few lines on why the paper was rejected. Sometimes it's because, and this happens quite often, sometimes the paper isn't within the scope, it doesn't fall within the scope of the journal's aims and scope. So yeah, let's say it's a journal focused on health law and you're writing about contract law. Obviously, you know, a paper on contract law mightn't fall within the scope of a health law journal. Other reasons for rejection, maybe they feel that maybe there are issues around structure, maybe there's issues around originality. And that's an important topic that maybe I didn't address within the presentation. A good academic paper for publication, it needs to demonstrate originality. What is the either in terms of the argument or in terms of the method that is used or the conclusions that are reached? It's very important to consider what makes this paper stand out, what makes it original, what does it add to the discussion that other papers haven't added? So being very clear about that, I think is helpful. Back, Jaka.
Right, thank you very much, Pak Ronan, for the response. There are so many questions because it is a very interesting topic. First, I will outline several questions written in Bahasa Indonesia. First, from Pak Martin Mulyono, are there any specific topics that should be avoided for writing academic papers in international journal, Pak Ronan? Second question from Pak Thomas Lingga. What is this? What are the simple strategies to stimulate the student ability to competence in college, a good habit in academic writing, on how to increase the academic habit? Second question. And the third from Bu Mega Tanujaya. Is there any journal submission limitation on journal review? You may also refer to the column chat, and also from Pak Edward II Saratoga from University of Erlangga, Surabaya. His question is, what is the novelty value of the scientific work that is popular today? So are there any, popular topics right now in international journals that may be interested? That is why it's to be written and to be researched. This is the second session, Pak Ronan. And then I will invite for the last session, for the third session, please, participants, please ask to Pak Ronan directly from the third session. Pak Ronan.
Okay. Yeah, so topics, the first one was topics to avoid when writing a paper? Topics to avoid.
Yes. Yeah. Are there any specific issues to be avoided in writing academic paper, Pak Ronan?
Yeah, I suppose maybe the best way to answer that is to consider what are the topics to write about, and maybe this answers the last question as well. So topics to avoid are topics that have been a topic or an issue or an argument that has already been made. Originality is really important. It doesn't have to be radically original, but it does have to have some originality and some relevance to the journal's readers. And so the topics that might be of interest in any particular field, there's a huge variety. Often the most important papers are papers that are written on topics that nobody has considered before. So it's very difficult for me to say, these are the topics. What I suppose I would really consider you to do, through your studies, through engaging with your supervisors, is to really think of new ways maybe of thinking about existing topics, new perspectives on existing topics, maybe looking at topics that are emerging with changes in technology within the health setting, for example, changes in society, emerging health issues. We all know about those in the last year. So really identifying, okay, what is new? What is within the legal system? What is new within society that we need to address, and how can an academic paper address that? Jaka, sorry, the second question I didn't properly.
Right. The second question are there about the novelty values in academic writing journals. You already said before that after the publications, there should be academic impact. The questions relate to the academic novelty and the impact of this writing of the journal. You may have the response, Pak Ronan.
Yeah, okay, impact. Yeah, no, sure. Obviously, an objective is to, with your academic paper, is to have it published. That's important. Another objective through publication is to have other papers subsequently cite your paper, to have a high number of citations. This is an indicator that your paper is of value. It's not an ideal indicator. It's not a perfect indicator, but it is an indicator. But then beyond the academic paper, you want your paper to translate into meaningful change, whether that's in the legal sense, change of law, or change of perspective amongst practitioners, or a change of perspective in terms of citizens with respect to a certain law. So how that's done. Not everybody reads academic journals, as we all know. They're not for, it takes experts like ourselves who are working on these issues for months and months, years, often decades, some people, so that not everybody is in a position to read academic papers and to fully understand them and their implications. So sometimes it's helpful for certain topics to break down, once a paper is published, to break down the paper into a summary of some kind, an executive summary that can be shared in some form. And maybe your supervisor might be able to help with that. And academics are increasingly looking at how to do this in their own work. So one objective is to publish the academic paper, but the ultimate objective underlying all of this is to ensure that your paper makes a broader societal impact. If that answers your question somewhat, hopefully it's helpful.
Right. Thank you, Pak Ronan, for your response. So, yes, it is very frustrating for non-English spoken countries to participate and to write in academic journals. Based on my experience, past experience, Pak Ronan, when we wrote the book published in Cambridge University, it took for me 12 time of revision. So it, we need to focus. We need to spare our endeavors to complete this the chapter book. So participants, Bapak Ibu, may I invite direct questions? That is why Pak Ronan may give a response, please. Anyone? Monggo, Bapak Ibu, silahkan. Pak Siswanto, mungkin silahkan Pak Siswanto. Di unmute dulu Pak Siswanto.
Oke, saya. Oke, ya. Terima kasih. Saya bahasa Indonesia saja. Saya sangat tertarik dengan materi yang dibawakan. Memang masalah hukum kesehatan ini sangat penting di masa sekarang ini, khususnya di Indonesia, di mana kita tenaga kesehatan selalu menjadi sasaran. Ya, saya dokter. Jadi kita kadang-kadang menjadi sasaran dari pihak-pihak lain untuk selalu mencari kesalahan-kesalahan. Oleh karena itu, dokter khususnya harus lebih memahami hukum kesehatan ini, lebih mendalami. Syukur-syukur kalau bisa kuliah ya, seperti di UGM ini, saya sangat apresiasi Bapak
Siswanto,
Jaka.
Pak Siswanto, saya potong. Kalau mau sekolah di Magister Hukum Kesehatan, silakan.
Ya, siap.
Nanti silahkan daftar, nanti kita prioritaskan.
Oke,
sekaligus ini
siap.
ajang promosi Pak Siswanto.
Ya.
Sorry Pak Ronan, I promote
Okay.
the
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Monggo Pak Siswanto, the questions please. So Pak Siswanto, Pak Ronan, concerned with the issues of the medical health law because he is a medical doctor. There are so many disputes with regards to the health law in the Indonesian legal system, and he is very glad and thankful for this opportunity to increase his knowledge with regards to the health law itself. I think it is the main point. So may I invite another participant, please? Anyone? may I invite, could you please? Or may I invite my students who raise a question? I will give you a mark, your final final subject. Anyone?
Sir, I want to ask a
Alright.
question.
Okay,
Actually, Pak, itu saya jangan pakai bahasa Indonesia aja ya Pak, soalnya agak sulit. Saya sebenarnya punya pertanyaan. Yang pertama itu, menurut sendiri, lebih baik menulis jurnal yang memang kemungkinan besar akan diterima oleh suatu jurnal sistem, atau memang yang sesuai yang kita inginkan. Karena terkadang apa yang kita ingin tulis itu tidak sesuai dengan submission yang dengan data yang diinginkan oleh jurnal, suatu sistem jurnal itu. Seperti itu sih Pak yang mau saya tanyakan. Lebih ke personal pendapatnya narasumber, seperti itu.
Right, Pak Ronan, do you get it what she is asking? So in essence, Pak Ronan, what should we prefer, or shall we have a prioritize with regards to the specific targeted journal, or shall we, click to our academic background to submit into a specific journal itself?
Okay, so it's about selection of journals. Yeah. I suppose, nowadays there are so many new journals. There's a wealth of different journals, and I understand there was a question about predatory journals as well in the chat. So this is important. You have to make sure that you are submitting to a peer-reviewed journal, a quality journal. That's really important. There are a lot of journals that will accept any paper, and while it's great to be accepted to a journal, it's important to be accepted to a quality peer-reviewed journal. And then in terms of the scope, so I think the question is, about, if I understand correctly, should we choose a journal that reflects our own disciplinary or background or particular research interests? I think that's really crucial. It's really crucial that the paper that you prepare aligns with the interests of the journal. So that's important. In preparing an academic paper, it's important that you feel you are confident that you understand the topic very thoroughly, that you are addressing all of the key aspects relating to that particular topic, and sometimes that might entail you focusing on a topic that you have been looking at, in depth for several months, maybe several years. So yeah, I think it's important to be thoroughly aware of the debates of relevance to the very specific topic that you are writing about. I hope that addresses Audrey's query, but if there's a follow-up question, Mongo.
All right, thank you, Pak Ronan. So this is the final question. You already have so many experience editing and reviewing journal submitted from Indonesia. What do you think about the main weakness of the manuscript delivered from the Indonesian people?
I haven't processed many from Indonesia, but yeah, maybe I could say a few words. Yeah, I suppose the recommendations would be recommendations I would provide anyone, anywhere. Key issues with any academic paper. Is there an original contribution? Is it well structured? Is it understandable? So is the language correct? It doesn't have to be, the language does not have to be 100% perfect. The journals, is it original? Is it well structured? Can I understand what is being written? For the small grammatical issues, the spelling and grammar, they can be addressed later on. But those would be the key items. Making sure that the topic is of relevance, has a wide relevance, and sort of articulating why the paper is of relevance to that journal, why the paper is of relevance to the wider readership. So you can indicate that in the title of the paper, in the abstract, and then throughout the paper, including in the introduction, when you're giving the rationale for the paper. What else? Don't be intimidated. Don't be afraid to try. We need a wider range of voices within academia, within journals. It's not fair that English native speakers are disproportionately represented within international peer-reviewed journals. We need voices from across the world within academia. So that's one of the reasons why I was delighted to speak about this topic, because I know it's challenging, especially for non-native speakers, to prepare a paper, but it is really essential that we have your voice, that your voice is represented within global discussions on important issues like health law, medical law, and other topics that people are working on. Do get your voice out there in the form of academic papers. In so doing, get the help that you need, whether it's through co-authoring with your supervisor, co-authoring with others with relevant expertise, and yeah, best wishes with your academic paper writing. It's something that improves over time. So you might write a paper once and it gets rejected. Don't give up. You can improve. Learn from the feedback that you receive, and you will improve and ultimately be successful.
Right. Thank you very much, Pak Ronan. And one other question, Pak Ronan, come from Pak Lesmana. Is it possible for him to invite you to have a guest lecture in his university with regards to the issues of law and development, maybe some other time? Because it is really interesting for us to have an international network for this kind of cooperation, Pak Ronan.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the interest in that. I'm just going to share my email in the chat for anyone who would like to contact me after this workshop. So yeah, I'm happy to speak at other events. Maybe we can continue the conversation via email, maybe set up a call. But yeah, very much interested in providing further support.
Right. Thank you, Pak Ronan. Pak Lesmana, it is very welcome to have another session with Pak Ronan for the different topic on his expertise and also from his experience as a researcher in Nottingham University. Participants and Pak Ronan, because time constraints, we have to end our session. It is scheduled to have a 1 hour lecture. It is for the opening another international workshop delivered in the medical health law program in our faculty. So, Pak Ronan and participants, it is a really fruitful discussion with regards to the trick and trip to have to publish the academic journal. It is our sincere, gratitude for you, Pak Ronan. Hopefully, we can meet for some other time in Gadjah Mada University or in other occasions. And we really hope we can meet directly as long as the COVID-19 already eradicated soonly in the future. So before we close our session, May we have a very, very warm applause to Pak Ronan, please?
Thanks very much, everybody. Look forward to staying in contact. Thank you so much again, Professor Jaka, for the invitation. Really happy to continue the collaboration with UGM.
Guys, thank you very much, Pak Ronan. And Bapak Ibu, sebelum kita akhiri, could you please turn on the camera, and then we can have your screenshot. And Kak saya, could you please take the screenshot, please? Oh, hello, Dr. Claudia. Good evening.
Yes.
Long time no see.
Good evening, Mr. Jaka, Mr. Ronan.
Right. Kak saya, could you please take the screenshot?
Ya, ini saya mulai dari screen pertama ya, Pak. Slide pertama.
Right. Please smile. Right, finish, Kak saya.
Satu lagi, Pak.
Right. So I really hope, Pak Ronan, you are in Indonesia, so we can have a traditional dinner, nasi rendang, nasi padang, sego goreng. Yeah, I think it is a very delicious and tempting, Indonesian food. Hopefully, you may visit Indonesia again, Pak Ronan. Yeah.
You're making me hungry.
Yeah, or sate kambing. Alright, Kak saya, it's finished?
Ya, sudah, Pak.
All right, Pak Ronan, thank you very much for your very, very insightful presentation. Hopefully, we can meet again. And thank you very much again, participants, all your participations in this workshop. Always be grateful to welcome you, and stay healthy and be happy. Thank you very much. Good evening, and have a very, very good day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you, Pak Ronan.
Terima kasih.